Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now on the phone from Washington, D.C. is Senator John McCain, the former GOP nominee for president. Senator McCain, thanks for being with us. Thank you. All right, first thing I want to talk about this issue of death benefits for the family members of service members killed in action. It was not until today that this came up for a vote in the House. We're seeing a committee in the House talking about this right now. While the House has passed a number of other measures to fund parts of the government, we've been waiting for this to happen. You've called this a disgrace, and I think most Americans, of course, would agree with that. How come this has taken so long? You know, we're entering the second week of the shutdown for this to take place.
Well, when you shut down the entire U.S. government, there are aspects of it, obviously, that we don't anticipate. Let me just give you another example. The Grand Canyon, arguably one of the crown jewels of America's park system, has been closed, and there are hundreds of employees there who are not employed by the government. They're not going to get back pay. They are having food from our food banks is being delivered up there to the Grand Canyon. So it's not only are people deprived of visiting the Grand Canyon, but the people who are innocent bystanders who were working there and are not government employees directly will not only not be repaid, but they're in a very desperate situation. That's just one small example of the effects of this shutdown, which is gone on too long, is a failure of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and we need to stop it. And we need to stop it right away and stop doing this to the American people. I saw a poll today that the approval rating of Congress was down to 5%, and I haven't met anybody in that 5%.
Well, Congress has a low approval rating. There's some other poll numbers out there. Public policy polling out of North Carolina asked people about some other issues. Things like hemorrhoids and jury duty scored better than Congress. Now, we're looking at this. The American people are tuned in. They're paying attention because there's a lot at stake here. And speaking in more general terms of this shutdown, you've been critical, as you were in the answer to that last question, on both sides of the political spectrum here for some of the language that's been tossed around by both parties. And that, of course, is making it more difficult for both sides to sit down at a table and hash things out. You were first elected in 1987. In all your years in Washington, have you ever seen things reach this low of a point and see lawmakers bicker back and forth like this?
No, I have not. And I would like to point out that I fought as hard or harder against Obamacare than any member of Congress. I fought when it first came up for 25 days and weekends. I was on the floor of the Senate every single day, and it passed on, by the way, pure partisan votes in 2009. In 2012, I traveled this country saying, elect Mitt Romney and we will repeal and replace Obamacare. And so we were sent on a fool's errand by certain members of Congress on both sides of the Capitol. And that is to believe that somehow we could force a repeal of Obamacare when it was clear we did not have the votes to do so. The number of votes that would be required to repeal Obamacare would be 67 Republican votes in the United States Senate, because the president would veto any measure that repealed Obamacare. So we were sent on a fool's errand in the convincing people that somehow by shutting down the government we could force a repeal of Obamacare. That was not going to happen.
And Senator, at this point, I mean, I think it's fair to ask is, if it's still possible to get some concessions on Obamacare. You know that the president's not going to delay it for a year. They obviously, and nobody can accuse yourself or other members of the GOP for not fighting hard against this law. I mean, it's been voted 41 times in the House to repeal or to fund it in some way. Nobody can accuse you guys of not trying to fight this law. But where we stand at this point right now with the
First of all, let me say that unfortunately there's an outfit because of the Senate Conservative Fund, I believe it's called, that is attacking Republicans, saying that they are not for defunding Obamacare because of a vote we took, which I won't go into all the details, but basically the vote that we took supported the House position of repealing Obamacare. But that, so no, we are being attacked by a conservative organization that has lots and lots of money that are attacking people and saying that somehow that we're for Obamacare, or alleging that we haven't fought hard enough against Obamacare. I will put my record of fighting against Obamacare with anybody in the United States Senate, including those who have recently arrived. So, yes, the president is making a serious mistake by not calling people over the way that Bill Clinton did and seriously negotiate. For example, the medical device tax is a tax on revenue, not profits. In other words, companies that lose money for one reason or another still pay enormous taxes on their revenues, and that has driven these companies overseas and lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. So that was already voted on in a budget vote when we passed the budget through the Senate.
So Senator, is that enough?
We should sit down with the president and say, look, repeal the medical device tax.
Now, is that one piece? Is that one concession enough? Do you think to get the ball rolling here? Is that enough to say?
No, I would say that. I would say that there's several other aspects of it. For example, let's make sure that the members of Congress live under the same Obamacare that every other citizen has to as well. There's the perception out there that that's not the case. We could do that. There's several other measures that we could take, and that if the president would sit down and negotiate.
Now, are those two provisions the bare minimum you think that the president could offer up here to get this moving? And it's probably not going to happen before we come up against the debt ceiling here. If he agreed to those in principle and said, let's get the government open again, let's get the debt ceiling raised, but we can seriously consider those two issues. I'm leaning in favor of that. But I don't want to negotiate with the so-called gun to my head, as the expression's been used in this. Do you think those two items you just mentioned there, the medical device tax repeal and also forcing member of Congress and other lawmakers in Washington to follow these rules as well, is that enough?
Well, I would hope so, but I would also hope that some changes in entitlement that the president has proposed in his own budget might be provisions that we could agree on, such as the, quote, change CPI, change in the consumer price index to make it more realistic on maybe even an increase in Medicare fees for the wealthiest. There's a number of ideas out there that if we sat down, and look, I'm a proud Republican, but I did watch President Clinton when we had this shutdown a long time ago, sitting down and negotiating and discussing for literally hours with the Republicans. And that is something that President Obama has refused to do.
There's a lot of nostalgia for the shutdown of 95, kind of ironically, as we look at this, as things continue to get more acrimonious. There are also some members of the GOP who are kind of downplaying the effects of a possible default on U.S. credit obligations. And not all of them are hardline Tea Party Republicans. I'm specifically talking about Senator Richard Burr, who's a pro-business guy. He was quoted in the New York Times this week saying a default could be manageable for some time. But, you're quoted in that same article as well. You disagree with Senator Burr, correct?
Well, it's not that I respect any.
Of course, but on this issue, you don't think it'd be manageable.
I don't claim to have the expertise and knowledge, but I'll tell you what I'm hearing from my friends in New York on Wall Street, that you will see the markets react. And if the markets react in a negative fashion, which is what everybody believes is going to happen, then it doesn't matter whether we can use revenues. It will be perceived, according to the people I'm talking to in the financial world, that this will be perceived as a revocation of the good faith and credit of the United States of America, and the markets will react. So we'll find out.
And, as we're looking at both these issues, the government shutdown, the debt ceiling approaching, we can talk about them together. We can talk about them as separate issues. You talked about the possibility still being there to get some concessions on Obamacare, but we're hearing less about that now. And as all of us in the media are parsing everyone's words here, it seems like Republicans might be pushing a little bit more for those other reforms you talked about, the change CPI, deeper spending cuts, more, fundamental tax reform issues and things at this point. Do you think it's possible, or do you think it's a better fight to try and get those those other things, those entitlement reforms, to change CPI at this point and leave Obamacare for another day. Medicare was changed after the law was passed and things like that. Obviously, even the president would admit the law is not perfect at this point. He says he's willing to negotiate, but not under this threat of deadline. Before we hit the debt ceiling, do you think it's a better fight for the Republicans to focus on those issues right now?
Well, the tragedy of all this from a Republican standpoint is that so far Obamacare has been a colossal failure. And if it were not for this fight we are in, and a lot of it is Republican versus Republican, you would see that headlines dominated by this flop of certainly the initial implementation of Obamacare. So we've kind of inflicted two wounds on ourselves rather than one. And I noticed an AP poll this morning that the American people continue to blame Republicans more than anybody else. But there is motivation for the president to negotiate because his numbers are going down too. Admittedly, not as badly as Republicans, but his disapproval ratings are going up as well. So it's hard to imagine why he wouldn't want to at least offer, although I guess yesterday he made some comments about it. But, the president can call leaders over to the White House, and they'll come. No one that I know of has refused to come to the White House when the President of the United States asked them to come over. So if I were, I don't understand why it wasn't yesterday say, okay, come on over. And these things I had in my budget we can discuss. And maybe we can make a commitment in the coming days ahead. But I'm not sure there's enough time now to do anything but the bare essentials.
Yeah. So would you recommend doing the bare essentials at this point, but at least coming to agreement in principle on what needs to be done, after
Yes.
October 17th? You think that's the best way forward? We're gonna likely see some sort of short-term deal here.
The reason why I say with some reluctance that we've got to stop this. We can't do this to families of service members. Well, we're going to fix the business of the death benefit for family members. What are we going to do for all of those people who are under contract with private companies who work for the government, no matter what area of government? They're never going to get repaid. They're never going to get compensation for this. It's not their fault. They're caught in the crossfire. And so it is a damning indictment of our insensitivity to the damage that we are doing to the American people. And so I will continue to fight against Obamacare for as long as the good people of Arizona will allow me to serve them. But I will not agree to this kind of damage to the American people, particularly based on, remember what this started out as, repeal Obamacare, which was impossible while President Obama is the occupant of the White House. And that's what's frustrating about this.
Yes, you set the bar was set very high, and obviously that goal could not be attained. So now anything else looks like somewhat of a retreat, or the word that I'm hearing a lot is capitulation. But the American people, as you referenced in those poll numbers, are losing their patience, and I think a lot of folks would agree with you that this needs to be fixed, and the sooner the better. And Senator, I do want to shift focus real quickly and talk to you about another issue that I know you're watching closely. We're waiting more information from the White House about this, but there are reports that military aid to Egypt is being cut after that military coup that ousted President Mohamed Morsi. What do you see as both the immediate and longer-term consequences of this move?
I think that it's pretty obvious that the repression in Egypt by the military has been very severe, and 1,000 people or so have been killed. That there is virulent anti-Americanism in the government-controlled media in Egypt. There is a very important relationship with the United States and Egypt and Israel going back to the Camp David Accords. There is unrest in the Sinai, which poses a threat to Israel. This is a very tough situation.
Do you think this gets the attention of the military leaders?
I think he did the right thing. We should have cut off aid. The law said, whether you like the law or not, the law said if there's a coup, the aid is cut off. Okay, that was the law. And so we should have abided by the law to start with, and then reinstated it, depending on the progress that's made in Egypt. We didn't do that. We sent mixed messages, and now we're sending a mixed message. We have influence over Egypt, whether it be tourism, whether it be American business, whether it be the IMF loan, and that influence can be exercised, and we are not doing that. It's part of this whole withdrawal from the world that has been the trademark of the Obama administration, and believe me, no one in the Middle East trusts the word of the United States of America anymore since the President of the United States threatened to strike Syria, and then now we are removing chemical weapons while conventional weapons are coming in from Russia and from Iran and Hezbollah, and the slaughter continues of Syrians only with conventional weapons, not with chemical weapons.
And you kind of lead
bizarre I've ever seen.
You kind of lead me into my next question here. You mentioned the Camp David Accords, and this decision from the White House, you agree with it, but not the timing of it. When coupled with the violence we're seeing almost on a daily basis in the Sinai now, does this put the Camp David Accords at risk?
I think it could long-term, but short-term, I don't think that Egypt, that General Morsi Sisi believes that it's in Egypt's interest to cut off the Camp David Accords. I don't think no matter how they behave, I think they believe it's in their interest to have the Camp David Accords. But if the unrest continues, look, you're going to have an insurgency in Egypt because 30% of the people support the Muslim Brotherhood, and you're going to see an increasing insurgency, and that's going to have really serious effects, which could lead to a further crackdown, which could lead to a very bad situation. And we should care about Egypt more than any place else because it's the center and heart and soul of the Arab world.
And perhaps two civil wars taking place in the same region, obviously that would be catastrophic as well. Senator, I want to wrap here on one last topic for you. The Supreme Court this week heard arguments on this case, McCutcheon v. Federal Elections Commission. McCutcheon is a Mississippi businessman, a Republican activist, and he says the current limits on campaign contributions violate free speech. You helped author the McCain-Feingold Campaign Reform Act of 2002. What's your take on the McCutcheon case, and is it time to go back to the drawing board and start over on campaign finance reform?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the Citizens United decision was that money is now free speech. That has never been a principle because then the people with the most money have the loudest megaphone. So they have shredded the previous campaign finance laws. We have seen a explosion of money, which there is no accountability, and I am confident there will be major scandals because there's just too much money washing around the political system, and I believe that the decision they made on Citizens for United may be a precursor for this, and then the unlimited flow of money in politics on the premise that money is free speech, which is something that a principle that I have never advocated nor seen as something we operated under in our political campaigns. But so
that sounds like a yes answer to my question that we do need to go back to the drawing board in campaign finance reform. But let me follow up by asking, do you think it's going to take some sort of scandal to prompt that?
Yes. It will take a major scandal now because we're talking about the Supreme Court rules on constitutionality, not just whether laws are valid or not. You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, unfortunately, so we'll have to leave that issue there for this time. But Senator John McCain, I want to thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for giving us your insight on all these issues. A pleasure speaking with you, sir.
I'm always pleased to have the opportunity to be on Newsmax.
We love having you, and thanks everybody for watching. Take care.